Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Rick Munisteri, Director of Meetings with NAMTA. It's good to see you. We know that it's challenging times for a lot of people, and we sincerely hope that everybody's doing okay. NAMTA Connect the Theater and NAMTA Connect the Cafe are our virtual platforms for education, demonstrations, social networking, and gatherings. And we'll have programs every Tuesday and Thursday. So be sure to go to the website, check out the schedule, and see which ones you'd like to join in. Everyone is muted today. Please use the chat feature located at the bottom of your screen to say hello to each other. And more importantly, if you have questions during today's demonstration, please type them there and I will ask them in real time. We'll also have time at the end for some Q&A. If you haven't done so already, in your upper right-hand corner, there's a button called Speaker View. Put that on. That will go to full screen, so you'll be able to see the demonstration a lot better. And we are recording today's session so that if you need to drop out for some reason, and more importantly, when you want to share it with your staff so that they can learn what you're going to learn today, you'll be able to do so. And we'll have that up in 24 to 48 hours afterwards. Today, we are pleased to bring you Painting on Stonehenge Aqua Black, presented by Legion Paper. Today's presenters are Mark Schottland and David R. Becker. And with that, Mark, you have the floor.
Thanks, Rick. My name is Mark Schottland. I'm the marketing director at Legion Paper, and I'm also joined by my colleague, Michael Ambrosio, who is in his green shirt on the screen there. He helped create the Stonehenge Aqua Black papers, and so he'll be available throughout the presentation and even at the end to answer any questions about that paper technically or any of our papers. He's very knowledgeable about that. Also, we're going to be giving away free sample packs of all the Aqua Black papers that David is using today. Send me an email with your shipping address and I'll get that out to you. It's mark, M-A-R-C, @legionpaper.com. And David will also pop that up on your screen at various times throughout the presentation, so you don't need to write it down right now. And speaking of David, I'm very pleased to present this artist, illustrator, author, and educator, Mr. David Becker. Many of you might have witnessed his magic at NAMTA last year in our booth. David studied at the American Academy of Art in Chicago and has spent most of his artistic life and career in Chicago. David is the author of multiple books on watercolor and has reached signature status to the Transparent Watercolor Society of America. He works with many mediums. Today he'll be doing watercolor. He also does oils and acrylics. He's mostly recognized for his watercolor scenes of Chicago, found both in public and private collections throughout the world. One of his more famous ones that you might see, or you actually might see it next year if you're going to be attending NAMTA in Chicago, is his work at the Starbucks and Macy's. So make sure you check that out if you're in Chicago, or check that out next year. So I'm pleased to present David.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Mark. And thanks, Michael and Rick, for doing this. And I'm happy to be here today. I'm going to show you how to work on this black new watercolor paper they had put out a year ago. So we're going to look at that, but I'm going to tell you a little story about how I got here. I first started out with Legion when they started with the Stonehenge Aqua White. And when Michael came to me and said that making this new paper white, and I was a big arches guy. And so I said, okay, well, we'll try this Stonehenge Aqua, and I actually really loved it a lot. And then the next year they came out with this black, and then I said, what? A black watercolor paper? How does that work? I'm a transparent watercolorist, and I think that's what most people talk about when they hear that. Any of my friends who are all watercolorists, they always say, hey, what are you talking about? A black watercolor paper? How does that work? We're working with transparent watercolors. And I say, well, you have to use white, but as I know, a lot of watercolors were taught to not ever use white. And so you have to kind of get it out in your mind that you have to use white because you're working with a black watercolor paper. So and the black watercolor paper it's called Stonehenge Aqua Black. It's not the Stonehenge paper, I think the printing paper that many have thought. And it's 100% cotton. It's archival. It's internally sized and surface sized. And it's synthetic sizing. And they come out right now, they came out first with the 140 black. And it was a 20 by 30, and they come up with a bunch of pads, a bunch of different size pads. When I first tested it, they had me test it like 2 years before they had made it. And again, it was really strange at first to kind of work with black paper, because I was thinking, this is not going to work. But it actually does work really well. And if you see behind me, these are the paintings I've done. And these are all behind me are wall watercolors. They're watercolor paintings, they're not acrylics, they're not gouache. gouache is different from watercolor, and I'm using transparent watercolor. And so some of the watercolor that I use has white in it. It's not a gouache. Again, it's not a gouache. It's a transparent watercolor, but it has some whites in it. I'll use like a lilac. And let me just go to this scene right now. Hold on 1 second. I just want to show you. And actually, this is where you can get Mark's email address also. But if you look at my palette, I have a bunch of watercolors that have a little bit of white on them. We've got pink over here. We've got these colors that have a little bit of white, but you need that for a black watercolor paper. And also, if you guys have questions, please put them up there on the chat, and I will have Rick read them to me. I won't be able to look at that, but if Rick will look at that and just give me the questions and stuff, and I'll answer them while I'm doing the thing, while I'm doing the demonstration. So I might as well get going on this demonstration too. So I'm just going to put this on the tabletop so you guys can see what I'm doing. And so if you look, this is 300 pound I'm working on today, and it's very, very thick. It almost feels thicker than 300 pound regular white paper. I'm not sure if it is, but it sure does feel really thick. And I didn't even put it on a board. I left it on just the paper, no board. I had to put it on, and so I'm just going to paint on it. It's not going to wrinkle. This is 300 pound. They do make the 140, and they're also going to be making a hot press. Right now, this is cold press Stonehenge Aqua Black. You got to remember the Aqua. It's the Stonehenge Aqua series. Here's the pads. Here I've got a couple of pads. They have the sample pads, and actually they have some really small ones too, which I didn't have available at the time. But they have this kind of size pads, and they have like a bunch of different sizes. And this is the regular Stonehenge, the cold press, the Aqua cold press, and that's the 140. And so again, I'm working with the 300 pound.
Yes. 1 second. Somebody wanted to know what the sizing is again.
The sizing is synthetic sizing, and it's internal and surface size. And if Michael or wants to hone in on that, but I think it's definitely the synthetic sizing, and it's surface size and internal size.
That is correct. Yes, perfectly said. Thank you.
So, and the fact is that this is, I've tried other black papers to do after I found out about this paper, and as I was practicing with it and actually testing it for them, when I was testing it for Legion when they first brought it out, I must have tested at least 10 different ones of that they were developing. And some of them were just awful, some of them were bad, but they got it right. And this one, because it's just a beautiful paper, and it takes the water really beautifully. Here I'm putting down the water onto the surface. And I just noticed now that I'm going to have a reflection in the water. We don't have it on the board. Oh well, you'll see that. Well, at least you see where it's going to be wet. So I'm going to wet the background like a regular watercolor. And now one thing about this paper is the watercolorist has to realize that on a white sheet of paper, we normally work from light to dark. On the black paper, we have to work from dark to light because we already have our dark color there. So to use this paper for like a really light scene, you could do, but I kind of use my black paper now for any of my dark scenes, and all my light scenes I do with the white paper, with the white Stonehenge. It's like, it just makes sense because if you're working a dark picture, it right away gets nice and dark. It's already there. And so I'm just going to poke out a little bit of what is happening there. And I'm going to start out with watercolor to show you how watercolor works with it. And again, I use white, and I can mix my white with any other color. You know, a lot of people say, well, I don't have the light colors. I have all the transparent colors. Well, you just buy yourself a tube of white and watercolor, and you can just mix it with that. And so you can make all the pinks and purples and whatever you'd like. So see how it just kind of falls in like a regular watercolor paper. And let me hold it up a little bit so you can actually see it. And so I'm going in here and just adding the light. And again, it acts just like watercolor paper because it is watercolor paper. I have a lot of friends who, and I teach around the country, and I just did a class last week in Goshen, Indiana, and we did acrylics, but we worked on black watercolor paper on this paper, and they loved it. You either love it or some people are just confused by it, you know, but it's just a beautiful paper to use. And so I can just go in there, see how just like regular watercolor, I put in enough paint, I can control the surface of the paint, or the controlling the paint and letting it drip so far along. And now some people say, well, is all you can use is like pastel colors. No, not at all. I just happen to use white. And if I don't want to use such pastel colors, then I just don't use the white as much. And I can use a color that's more transparent, but just added thicker. So let's say I'll use a little red with no white in it. It'll get about 20% darker, where like watercolor paper, white watercolor paper will get about 20% lighter when you add. So you just gotta kind of change your thinking about basically all the way around to the other side. Basically, you're getting everything that's 20% lighter will be darker in black. So here again with a little brown. And also, if you want to just make your black a slight darker color, you just add a little bit of that transparent color to the black, and it works perfectly, which I'm going to do next. And let me just finish this background here real quick. Just going to put a little color in there. And I have a big thing in my teachings on how I teach watercolors. I teach them to float their pigment. I have asked them to put down water and then just let them float the pigment into the water. And since this is a watercolor paper, it works really well, just like a regular sheet of white. Now, if you're doing this on a piece that doesn't have sizing on it, it just is horrible. It just goes all over the place. And so the fact that this has sizing in the black paper just makes it wonderful. It just makes it a whole new ball game. Let me just get in here and get this part done. I'm going to show you how to take a regular transparent color without any white and just do a light coloring of the black, which is a great, super great thing, because if you're doing a scene like this where most everything is a scene, here's a photograph that I'm using. So if you look at the scene, most of the scene is pretty dark. And so all I have to do is add a little bit of color to some of the scene where the blue is, let's say. And so I don't have to use a opaque color because the black is already there, which I would have put on with white. Here it's already there. So I can just dip into transparent blue. I'm using an ultramarine right here. And I can just do his whole shirt, and it will just kind of stain it with the blue. So it's like you're doing staining of the black and making it more blue, and so that you don't have just a solid black. And then I can take and I can wet it a little bit farther, and that will get me to a light blue then. And I can just put the light blue in there. And again, because I'm floating my pigment on top of the surface into water, it will just kind of soften itself. The greatest thing about watercolor paper is, and watercolor in general, and actually I do this with acrylics too, and I will be doing a little acrylics in a second. I have in the round palette over here, I got acrylics, and I've got some metallics also. And let's take a metallic silver here. And actually I got a silver here too. I can just take a metallic watercolor. And I also have metallics over there in the acrylics. And basically they work the same way because I'm using a fluid acrylic and I'm using just a regular watercolor. But the fluid acrylics end up acting like watercolors because they're fluid. So a little bit of everything here. I'm going to put a little bit of opaque acrylics in there. So the top of it is coat. I'm just going to get in there. And I paint pretty quickly, and so we'll probably get this done in about half an hour. So ask your questions now before I get done. Make sure you get the questions in there. I used to work in an advertising agency. I was a storyboard illustrator, so I was always doing storyboards for TV commercials. And so here, this is kind of like that. Somebody have a question?
David, it's Michael. If you could also make mention to the group about the paper's uncanny ability to lay flat, please.
Yeah, well, you see right now it's laying pretty flat, and because I wet it really extremely well. I mean, there's a lot of water on it, and right now you can see it's just laying flat. I didn't put it to a board, and I didn't put it on a board, which I normally do, but because I didn't have one around at the time, I just decided not to, because it lays flat, and so I don't have to worry about that. Now I won't have any tape marks in it anyway, so I'll just go right to the edge. But yeah, it lays perfectly flat. And even the 140, it will, if you do any kind of paper thinner, it's going to wrinkle a little bit depending on how much water you put on it if you soak it. But if you soak it a real lot, it'll just stick to the front. And a lot of watercolors, what they do is they wet the back too at the same time if you're using 140. But the 300 pound, it doesn't wrinkle at all. It just is beautiful. So it's a gorgeous paper. And I know it's going to be kind of hard for you first to think about, working dark and working black, or having the artist. I mean, every artist I've ever gone to has always just gave me this stare, this weird stare in my face, and going, "What?" It's like, "What are you talking about? Black watercolor paper? That doesn't work. It wouldn't work." And I go, "No, it does. It does work. It does work with watercolor." They feel that it would work with gouache. They think that because gouache has white in it, but nowadays even the new gouaches, the new watercolor gouaches, there's a lot of colors that are very transparent that don't have white in them. And so it's not gouache. This is just regular watercolors, regular transparent watercolors. And if you use it thick enough, of course, you know, if you want it to be that particular color, you have to use a little bit thicker. But if you add the white, it will kind of give it that color if you just add a little bit. If you add a lot, it's definitely going to make it more pastel-like. And I always felt like yeah, go ahead.
Excuse me. Somebody would like to know, what pencil did you use to sketch out your design?
I used a General pencil. It was there at one of the expos. One of the people over at General Pencils, they gave me this white pencil. I think it's a oh, which one was it? It was a white chalk pencil or a charcoal pencil, but it's white and it works well with watercolors. So I just used a white pencil, a General white pencil. And you can use watercolor pencil also, but I used white. And actually, you can even use a regular pencil because it's black and you see the lead. You see the lead of a regular pencil. So that alone, it works just fine. Just to use a regular 2B pencil or a regular school pencil, number 2 pencil, it works fine. I've done that before with no problems whatsoever. And so in his, I'm mixing my acrylics and my watercolor together, which actually the class I taught this week in the workshop I taught this week, I actually was working both together. We were working acrylics and watercolor. And I used to, I learned this from another teacher that she would use medium in her watercolor to make it acrylic. And so now I just figured, well, I don't have to do that. I can just use the medium of acrylic and watercolor. It's all water media. So I called the class a water media class because we are using all the mediums of water. Watercolor, acrylics. Right now I have 4 different kinds of acrylics here. I have gouache acrylic, I have regular acrylic, heavy bodied, fluid, and ink acrylic, which all the companies have now. They all have the ink and they all have the fluids. And of course the heavy bodied, which is normally what they use. And so you see what I'm doing is I'm going from a medium and I'm heading light. I'm just getting lighter and lighter as I go along, which normally with watercolor, you go from the lightest to the darkest. And so my dark is already there. So I just have to get lighter and lighter as I go along. I'm just going to get softer and softer. And we'll just get darker or lighter and lighter because the dark is already there. You can see that I've done a couple of things. This is one of the things we did last week. And you can see the dog is already there, you know, and the dog is already dark. And it's good for doing things that are dark. And so this was a black dog, a Bernese mountain dog. And so he's always dark. And I did this one before a lot of times because it's a little bit neat to show students how you can take a black item and just make them come forward. And actually it's easier for students to do because they find that adding the light on top of the dark paper is you're adding the light, where with the white paper, you're adding the shadow and stuff. And so it's a little bit harder to do. And so actually it ends up being easier for the student to actually do their work from dark to light. It's just different, but I found it's actually, at first it was hard to get students to kind of take the workshop because they're like, that doesn't seem possible. Why would I, do a white watercolor on a black sheet of paper? I'd have to use white, and that's illegal. At least I think so. It's definitely not illegal to use white on black. Sargent used it. Andrew Wyeth used the white. So I think it's okay to use white. I know a lot of students are taught in school never to use white when they're using the watercolor, but I'll give you that right now. Go ahead and use it. It's actually kind of fun to use white.
David, we have another question.
Sure.
Someone said that they see that you have metallic pans. Have you used Daniel Smith metallics?
I haven't used them yet, but I'm sure they're, a lot of the companies they all came out when, actually they were promoting this a lot with black paper. They were promoting a lot with the metallics, and it does look very cool. Let me just do something here. I'll do a metallic, and I haven't tried those yet. The ones right here are Fine Tech that I'm using right now. And I got some Holbein also. I got some Holbein metallics and fine tech metallics right here right now. And this is what I'm using right now. Hold on one second. Let me see if I can see this on my screen. So, a little bit closer. If you can see how it's metallic, you can kind of put a little bit of metallic in there, and it really pops it up. You know, you can put it in there, and it just really shines out there. Even though, like, an artist doesn't really need the metallics to actually make this instrument look metallic, but hey, it's fun. You know, it's kind of neat to get some of the metallic in there. And get in here with some darks again. I gotta get in the space with some darker colors. Let's hear some more questions so I can answer them. No problem with that at all. If I can't answer any technical questions about the paper, I will give it over to Michael or Mark, and they can probably definitely answer it. And you hear this right now I'm using is a metallic blue. I'm just putting it into the shadow. I've done a bunch of those speed paintings, so this is maybe done pretty quickly. So, being a storyboard illustrator for TV storyboards, we did a lot of TV commercials, and you get really fast with painting. Because when that meeting had to be in by, the storyboard had to be in by a meeting at lunchtime, you got to get it done. So there's something about that that really helped a lot when it came to my painting, being able to do it a little bit faster. And also I've been painting now for at least 30, 40 years of watercolors, and I've been teaching it since then, since I got out of school. And so now I'm going to get a little bit lighter and lighter as I go along here. Here's my other brush. I'm using nylon brushes, synthetic nylon brushes. They work well on, just like any other watercolor paper. These work just as good on this paper as on white. And I even use my watercolor brushes for my acrylics because I'm using my acrylics like watercolors. So, you know, it doesn't make sense to use a brush that is the same, just with a longer handle. I can do that also with my watercolor brushes using them in acrylics. So I'm going to go in here, just get that in there. One thing that really is appealing with the black paper that I really like a lot is how it just pops. I've done this one, actually you can't see that, but the one behind me, let me just screen this for a second. There's one behind me right here, you can see. It just pops when you do the lights, and the dark's already there. A lot of times if you're doing something with the dark, see, you have to use so much paint to get that dark, and it never really gets right to the really darkness of it. So by using the dark paint or the dark paper, it just makes it so much easier just to put in a little bit of the light. It just makes sense to use a paper that is white or that is dark if you're doing a really dark painting, like this one I'm doing right now. I mean, if I'm using a white paper, I've got to use a lot of dark colors, and it never seems to get as dark as this. So I recommend it highly if you're doing dark paintings, and just have them both in your arsenal. You can have the white paper, the Stonehenge White Aqua, and then the Stonehenge Black Aqua, or the Aqua Black, and they're both, you know, have them in there. And when you look at your painting and you see it has more dark, then use the black. And if you have it more in the light, then use your white.
David, we have another question. It's actually a two-parter.
Sure.
What do you consider to be the most difficult part of painting? What is the most rewarding part of the process?
I've pretty much painted my whole life, and so to me, painting is just one of those things that I love to do. So I didn't ever think about not painting, because ever since I've been a kid, that's all I ever did was draw and paint. And then when I got a job as a storyboard illustrator and advertising agency, that was wonderful because I could do my job and do what I love to do at the same time. I kind of left that life about, well, they left me, but I kind of went into teaching because I've taught all the time. So I've always wanted to teach. Right out of school, I was teaching. And so I wanted to kind of get into teaching. And so now I go around the country teaching, around the world actually, but this year, of course, not. I taught 3 so far this year, and I normally teach about 20 or so workshops a year. But yeah, I've always loved seeing people get better with their watercolors. And watercolors to me just seems, and now that I'm doing more acrylics also, it seems like the easiest of all the mediums to do, or actually the simplest because you don't need much materials. I mean, I could go on a train. I actually filmed me one time on my commute to work. A lot of times I would bring my little tablet with me with my little thing. I'd be painting, and people see me on the train just painting as I'm going to work. And so I've always painted. It's just that it was so much fun. I mean, how can you not have fun? So the most challenging part was just finding time to paint, because to get good at it, you just have to do it a lot. That's what I tell all my students. It's like you have to do at least 100 paintings to stop being a beginner for one. And then after you get over those 100 paintings, then you're just always learning. I mean, you're always going to learn. It's a great thing about art. As long as doesn't matter how old you get, you're going to still be learning. And you're going to be changing your styles, and you're going to be changing what you're doing. And now I've been changing my papers. I went to a black paper, and it's, there's always something new that you can try. And so I totally recommend trying. Even watercolors, you don't have to not do it because you're a watercolorist. I find, like when Michael came to me at first and said that he had this black paper after I was testing out the white, because again, I was a true arches guy, and that's all I ever used was arches. But then I fell in love with the Stonehenge because it was just a little bit more like I used more of a Bristol board type of thing, and I felt like the Stonehenge Aqua, the cold press, was more like a textured hot press, if that makes sense. But it still absorbed, but didn't absorb so much that I could keep some of the stuff on top. And so that was kind of the fun part about it. Is like, oh, right, this paper is great. It's just exactly what I wanted to do. And then they come out with the black. And then when they first came out, I said, yeah, what? And that's what you're going to get with most people. They're going to more reaction. Now you notice as I'm painting here, it gets about 20% darker. And so as watercolors, normally that happens lighter, because you're using white paper. But so here you have a lot of times you really have to push the paint to make it sure it's lighter, because it will dry 20% darker. Darker. So when I'm teaching, a lot of times I get that all confused, because teaching it's like totally opposite of what you're doing when you're doing it with the white paper compared to the black. But it's all possible. All of them are possible to paint watercolor on, because I've had some people say, well, that's impossible. You just can't use that white, the transparent watercolor on it. And I'm here to prove you wrong, because you can definitely use the thing, but you just have to use a white watercolor. And also the white watercolor you want to use is not the Chinese white. You want to use the titanium, because the Chinese white is more of a transparent white. And so you want to use one that's more opaque. So I use the titanium and not the Chinese white. And somebody's got to time me here. Let me know. I didn't know what time it is, so let me know when we're getting close so I can finish her up. I work well under pressure.
You are 30 minutes in. It's just 3:30 right now.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Rick. All right, so we're going, and so here we go with, I'll show you what it does with the acrylic. Actually, hold on, I gotta do this hand down here. And I know it is really weird to see somebody, a watercolorist, using white paint. You get used to it. I know it looks like I'm using gouache, and that's what everybody's mistaking it for. They're always saying, well, no, you're using gouache. I'm not using gouache. It's a watercolor. I'm using actually the Holbein watercolors, and I do use the Holbein watercolor titanium white to mix with that. So it is not gouache. Gouache dries a little bit differently than this watercolor does, and it also, the Holbein stays wetter long because it has an oxidol in it. So it's not a gouache, just to make that clear. Because everybody have gone, and a lot of times when I do demonstrations for places, they're just saying, well, no, that's gouache. I go, no, it's not. It is watercolor. It is watercolor, transparent watercolor that I'm adding a watercolor to, a watercolor white to it. And it is thick sometimes some places, but I do that with regular white paper too. Sometimes you get a surface like some of this stuff back here, but you see how it was so light at first, and now it got 30% lighter or darker. And so you just have to watch that. You have to learn how to control that so it doesn't get lighter. So you just have to add a little bit more pigments when you're doing your watercolor. So bring this down here. So the thing I really like most about the black paper is when you're doing like I was saying, a darker image, is that it's so easy to do. A lot of students already do tints. They do tint. They don't use that much pigment when they're using watercolor because a lot of them are very cheap and they don't want to use enough of the paint. And so I have to get them to really use a lot of paint when they're doing it in a wash. But this is perfect for them because if they just want to get a touch of dark color in there, like in the blue, like I did this blue right here, I just have to use a little bit of that, and it's all the black is already there, so I'm just darkening that blue a little bit. And so it's just really neat that you don't have to use much paint. So in the long run, if they're doing a dark painting, they'll save them money if they use the black instead of a white paper where they have to put so much pigment on there to get it black or get it dark. Now I'm waiting for Legion to put out a gray paper. All right, Michael, Mark, got to put out a gray paper. That's going to be next, right?
Yeah, sure.
It's kind of fun. So I'm going to put this little corduroy in there.
David, if you could make mention to the group also about what you find with this true watercolor paper versus taking, let's say, a black cover stock type of paper and trying to put these types of watercolor paint on that versus this.
Yeah, well, for one, watercolor doesn't work really well on those other papers, just like it wouldn't work when you're using, a gessoed canvas or just like something that's gessoed. It sits on top and it doesn't really absorb. It doesn't give you that feel like you do get with watercolor. And so when you're using those papers that have no sizing, and it also, when you go to rub on something out, it just falls apart. So like a lot of times in my paintings, I'll rub something out. I'll take a little bit of the brush and I'll just rub out a little area, get next to the white or the black. And when you do that to those other papers, they just kind of disintegrate. They kind of like, and they don't give that nice wash. When you put it on a wash, what happens here is it sits on top and it just stays where you want it to be. You can control the watercolor, and when you get to that point where you're controlling your watercolor, and you head over to a color or to a paper that isn't sized, it just doesn't do it. You're going to have to, actually, I think they sell sizing. You have to actually put sizing onto your paper so you can actually work it like on watercolor. So definitely, it's a cool thing that you guys made this black paper that was actually sized. I have tried some of those other ones, and it's just not the same. Just not the same at all. It's if you're doing something that's like really thick oils, you're putting it on there, and then I can see that's a whole different thing. When you're putting a stencil or something on, that's a different thing. But this is a watercolor paper, literally 100% cotton watercolor paper that's synthetically sized on the surface, inside. So you're getting a good paper. You're getting a good quality paper. And I've had students now do all kinds of different things with this paper too. I've seen them all take it, and I usually give away a piece just so they can give me, and I always tell them, hey, give me a piece, show me something different that you can do with it. They've been coming up with some amazing stuff. Because it's something new, it's something different, and why not be the next artist that does something different with a different kind of paper? It's if you're always stuck with the same paper, I always tell them, try something different and new. I'm going to rewet the surface and back there again just to show you that when I go back in, now it's not going to lift up out of the paper because it soaked into the paper a little bit, and the sizing gave it that option to do that. So now I'm going to rewet it a little bit right there. I'm just going to put a little bit lighter color in there just so you can see it again, because it got 20% lighter or darker, and so you didn't see the light on this side any again. So I'm just going to take it, and you pretty much handle it just like watercolor paper, and you just have to make sure that you're adding a lighter color. It really is no difference handling it. So if you're a watercolorist and you're using white paper, this is no problem at all to use. You just got to get yourself a tube of white or some other colors too that you'd like, and that will add to the benefit of your colors that you want. And I'm doing a watercolor technique on here. If you want to do an oil painting, or not an oil painting, a acrylic technique on there, that's fine. You could use it thick on here too. Here, I'll show you. I'll do some thick acrylic on it. So I'll go in here with this is my acrylic batch over here. I'm going to take some pearl essence here. I'm just going to put this on in the light area. This is kind of has a shiny metallic look to it. It's the pearl essence. And so it'll pop forward. I'll put a little bit on there. And you can put it on thick. You know, it's just, it's fine. It's easy. Another thing people always say is like, well, is this like working on the Elvis Presley, what do you call it, the black velvet? I go, no, it's, but I got to tell you though, every painting I've ever done on black has sold. So that's a pretty good reason to start using it. I've sold every one of my good paintings that I've had that I wanted to show people is sold. So it's a pretty cool thing. I'm gonna do a little bit more here, and I think we're pretty close. So get your questions in before we get done here. Let's get in here. So now I'm going thicker. I'm going to use a little bit thicker and add it like it's almost like an acrylic. I'm going to get a hard edge, of course, because when I'm using it thick, it's not blending itself. Watercolors, the nice thing about watercolors, that it blends itself. You never have to blend anything because you just add water. You put the water down and let it bleed in there. Acrylics, you know, unless you're using them thin in water, you have to soften the edge. That's the main reason I love watercolors. I'm a lazy artist, and so I just like it to do its own thing. So it just goes in there, does its own thing, get the soft edges happening on their own. You don't have to do it. Let's see, get this nose a little bit brighter here. Get some gold in here. And see, when you put it on thicker, of course, it's going to just cover up right away the black. And so, you know, it's no problem to cover up some of the black. And if you need your painting to be really dark, you know, again, the black is the way to go, boy. And getting more and more people used to that too. I'm not sure if the watercolor societies, I entered that painting in the American Watercolor Society. It didn't get accepted, but that doesn't mean it was because of the paper. It was just that they had better painting probably. But you know, I think some of the watercolor societies do accept that, the paper, the black paper. A little bit more light here, and then we will call it a day here, I think. Okay, I'm just gonna do a couple more things here, and then we're done. And I'm gonna put the screen up there again so you can get samples from Mark with the address on there. Let me just change this over to this page here. And so there's the sample packs that Mark will send to you, and his email address looks like it's mark@legionpaper.com. And he'll send you some black paper, right, Mark? I think. And so,
yes, that's correct. The samples will go out over the next couple of days.
So there you have it. There's the that's a 300-pound Stonehenge Aqua Black. You got to remember the Stonehenge Aqua. It's the Aqua series, and they make the white and they make the black. And this is the 300-pound, which I guess they're going to be making a 140 hot press too. I cannot wait for that because I love hot press, and so we'll see how that works too. But give it a shot. Give it a shot. See if your customers love black. Have them try it. It's just actually all the things I was talking about. It's just reverse and with the regular watercolors. But any questions? And other than that, we're good to hear. I'll give it back to you.
Anybody have any questions? If you do, please unmute yourself and go ahead and ask.
I would just add, I was just going to add so everybody knows. So the existing range right now is the 140-pound cold press, which is available in sheets and pads. The 300-pound cold press is available now in sheets, and soon to launch over the next month or so will be blocks. Blocks will be available, 300-pound black, and then the next evolution step is on the hot press, which will probably be about 2 to 3 months down the road. That will be coming fourth quarter.
Mark, you have anything you need to add?
No, not at all. That's
Um,
Michael pretty much
we
said
have one question for you and Michael. What
Yeah,
distribution carries it?
yeah, I saw that just come through. McPherson's has it, Alvin has it, SLS has it. So the three dealers all have it. And most of the major retailers obviously have caught on to it as well.
Anything else from anybody? Okay, well, I'd like to thank Mark, Michael, and David for a fantastic session. I learned a lot. I'm enjoying these. I want to thank everybody for being here today. On Thursday, we do have a session coming up on Pointy from Google. So if you're interested in that, please sign up for that one. And that'll be Thursday at 3. And with that, enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. Thanks for being here.